Welcome to a special interview for VIT Today. Today we have with us Mr. Prashant Bhushan. As you know, he is an Indian public interest lawyer in the Supreme Court of India. He was a member of the faction of the India Against Corruption movement. So it's a privilege to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to.
Thank you, sir. So we wanted to start this interview by something more open-ended. We wanted your take on today's Indian judiciary. Several incidents in the recent times put constitutional and legal morality under serious question. So where do you think the Indian judiciary stands today?
Yeah, so as most people or many people, including many retired judges, have been saying, the independence of the Supreme Court in particular is in serious question today. And the reputation of the Supreme Court has never been as bad as it is today. I don't think it was as bad even during the emergency. And so there are many reasons for this, but the most important reason is the collapse of its independence, which we are seeing in the manner in which it is dealing with politically sensitive questions and issues where the government has a serious political interest. These issues could be issues relating to migrant labor. The issues are relating to the shutdown of internet in Kashmir or in around the farmers' protests. It could be about abolition of Article 370 in Kashmir, or about the Citizenship Amendment Act, or about the Rafale deal. So many things, or the manner in which they dealt with the Birla Sahara corruption case, etc. So in all these cases, we are seeing that the court is almost always siding with the government and at the expense of what we consider to be constitutional morality, fundamental rights of citizens, etc. So this is an across the board thing that we are seeing, which was commented upon by those 4 judges in that unprecedented press conference 3 years ago, where they said that the then Chief Justice is misusing his powers as master of roster and fixing politically sensitive cases before particular benches in order to secure an outcome favorable to the government. And that has endangered our democracy. And that unfortunate situation is still continuing. In fact, it has even exacerbated since that time.
Okay, so our next question is, recently you called out the Bollywood celebrities for remaining mute when the farmers were protesting, and how suddenly they unmuted themselves when Rihanna and Greta spoke out. So what's your take on the complete India against propaganda trend and Greta sharing a social media toolkit on Twitter?
Yeah, so this is a very unfortunate thing that we are seeing in India, that some of our Bollywood icons, sports icons, and of course, many of our mainstream media journalists, etc., have just become arms of government's propaganda. And this whole India against propaganda trend, which was a Twitter trend set in motion by the Ministry of External Affairs of the government by their press statement, that was then picked up by a number of Bollywood and sports celebrities who had remained silent all this while when farmers were being badgered and kind of barricaded, and their internet had been shut down, their water, electricity had been cut off, many of their people had been arrested, beaten up, journalists were being prevented. They didn't say anything about those human rights violations. And suddenly, just because Rihanna said that why aren't we talking about these farmers' protests, and she tweeted a CNN story about the internet shutdowns, suddenly because of the government's prompting, Ministry of External Affairs prompting, all of them or many of them woke up suddenly and started trending this India together, etc. India against propaganda, India together, which was so. It's very ironical that they trend India against propaganda when this government is a government which survives only and only on propaganda. This is a government which has promoted hate, which has promoted fake news, which has promoted propaganda on an unprecedented scale by using a lot of media organizations, television channels, etc., to just propagate their propaganda. So it just shows that most of our so-called icons have feet of clay. They are not able or willing or have the conviction to stand up independently. They are willing and happy to be controlled by the government and then be lauded with various government favors and uh, avoid raids by the income tax or enforcement directorate, etc., and get some Bharat Ratna like this fellow Tendulkar got, or various other Padma Shri and so on and so forth. So that they've shown themselves to be very, very petty people who do not have any conviction or courage of their convictions, who are not able to stand up to the government, and who are willing to use their celebrity status in order to become tools of government propaganda.
Yes, sir, absolutely, sir. Okay, so going to our next question. Uh, so, in a recent interview to Karan Thapar for The Wire, you agreed of losing confidence on the apex court when asked about the WhatsApp leaks of Arnab Goswami. What are the primary events that have led to it? And as a Supreme Court lawyer yourself, what are the changes that you have observed in the attitude of the court, if any?
Yeah, see, there were many problems with the judiciary even earlier. There was, for example, a problem of the poor in this country who don't have lawyers not getting access to the courts. They're being helpless against false cases foisted on them by the police, etc. This problem was there earlier. Then the fact that cases get delayed, they don't get decided for a long time, you keep getting dates. Then the fact that many judgments are incorrect judgments because the judges are either incompetent or judges are corrupt. These problems were there to begin with for a very long time. But there is a new problem which has come up in the last 4 or 5 years, which is the collapse of the independence of the judiciary. This problem we have seen suddenly with the coming of the Modi government, that after this government came, the independence of the judiciary has suddenly collapsed. And we are seeing that in the manner in which they are dealing or not dealing with important politically sensitive cases. Many cases are not being dealt with, such as the CAA or the electoral bonds or the Article 370 Kashmir. Other cases which have been dealt with also have been kind of dealt with in a very shoddy manner in favor of the government at the expense of human rights of people, at the expense of corruption in this country, etc., such as the Rafael case or the Birla Sahara case or the migrant workers case. So many cases. So this is a new and very serious problem of course, the independence of the judiciary also collapsed briefly during the emergency, but it recovered soon after that. But now we are seeing this kind of thing continuing for the last 4 or 5 years. And this has happened due to a combination of reasons. See, one of the things is that the Chief Justice of India, being what is called the master of roster, who decides which case is to be heard by which bench. So if you if the government is able to control the Chief Justice, it can virtually control the outcome of every political politically sensitive case that comes to the Supreme Court, because the affiliations, the ideologies, and the proclivities and the weaknesses of judges are known to the government and to the Chief Justice. Therefore, every politically sensitive case can be sent to an appropriate bench for being decided in the manner in which the government wants it to be decided. And unfortunately, this is what has been happening over the last 4 or 5 years. And that is why people have lost confidence. That's why the farmers didn't want to approach the Supreme Court, because they had no confidence that the Supreme Court would be able to act independently against the government. That's what has happened.
Okay, sir. So on that note, I mean, regarding the farmers' protest, the government has had over 11 rounds of talks with the farmers, and yet both the parties haven't arrived at any consensus. So why do you think the farmers have refused to budge from their demand of repeal of the farm laws by accepting the suspension of laws for a period of 12 to 18 months?
No, that's because the farmers are convinced. You see, this matter has been going on ever since the ordinance was issued in June. So for the last 7 months, the farmers, and in Punjab, there has been a great deal of public education about the effect of these three laws and how these three laws would end up handing over agriculture and farmers to the corporates, to the large corporates who wanted. The whole object of these three laws is to allow the big corporates to enter the agriculture sector, whether by way of trading or by way of contract farming or by way of hoarding, which is the third law regarding the Essential Commodities Act. So therefore, this kind of public education had been going on in at least in Punjab and in good parts of Haryana, and they realized that the whole MSP system, which is largely there only for wheat and rice, because that's where the procurement takes place, and it's primarily from Punjab and Haryana. So the Punjab and Haryana farmers realized that this whole MSP system would collapse and they would have a lot to lose by these three laws. And therefore, they have been well educated on this, and therefore they are clear in their view that these laws need to be repealed. Now, just suspending them for 12 to 18 months, they felt was not good enough. Though, in my view, if they are suspended for 3 years, then perhaps for all practical purposes, these laws would be as good as dead, because this government would not have the courage to resurrect them after 3 years when they are facing a new Lok Sabha election. So that is why the farmers have been adamant. But you see, there's no reason for the government to be adamant about this. If they are willing to suspend them for 18 months, then why not repeal them for the time being? And after discussion with all the stakeholders, bring a new law after 18 months or whatever. Why stand on prestige? This has become an issue of prestige, especially when these laws have been illegally passed, because in the Raj Sabha, the government didn't have a majority. They couldn't have got these laws passed in the Raj Sabha. The majority of the MPs were opposed to these laws, but they passed it amidst a lot of shouting, etc., by a voice vote without taking a physical vote, when the rules require a physical vote. Even if one MP asked for a physical vote, there should have been a physical vote. But they didn't allow a physical vote because they realized that they didn't have a majority. So why stand on prestige? Just withdraw them and thereafter have discussions and bring a new law after 18 months or whatever.
Right, sir. So just to follow up on that, so how, according to you, has the mayhem that broke out on the Republic Day impacted the farmers' protests?
So the government is using that mayhem in order to, it wasn't that big a mayhem, but whatever happened is being used by the government in its propaganda war against the farmers. And it's using all this complicit media, what is known as the lapdog media or the Godi media, in order to create an impression that these farmers are very violent people, they are very indisciplined people, etc. Despite the fact that for more than 2 months, a farmers' movement had been going on very peacefully in a very organized manner, where for the first time in history we saw lakhs of poor people were being fed langar free in these protest sites. Uh, and where they had taken out an earlier tractor march about 10 days before this or 2 weeks before this, which was very well organized and very peaceful, which was outside Delhi. But this time it appears that eventually the police gave permission for this, knowing full well that there were a few stray groups which did not want to adhere to the route which had been agreed upon, and thereby encouraged people. The police seems to have encouraged these farmers to go off route, go up to Red Fort and ITO, etc. This is what the information is, that the police actually encouraged them to go to Red Fort and ITO, etc. off the agreed route, in order for the government to do this propaganda against the farmers that they are very indisciplined, violent people, and so on. Some of the groups who had announced on the 25th night that they would not adhere to the agreed route and that they would go on the ring road, etc., they were not prevented by the government. There were no barricades preventing them from going onto ring road and off the agreed routes. And they were clearly allowed and even encouraged to go off the route in order for this kind of confusion to take place and in order for the government to then unleash a propaganda war against the farmers.
Yes, sir. So what, according to you, is the best solution to resolve this problem, sir?
The solution is very clear. They should withdraw these three laws and then have proper discussions, whether in a parliamentary committee or otherwise, with farmers and farmers groups, etc., and then come up with a revised law which will be in tune with what the farmers have been demanding for a very long time, that there should be a legal guarantee for MSP on the crops on which MSP is declared.
Okay, so our next question is, so you know that the biggest problem that the judiciary is facing right now is the number of pending cases. So, sir, do you think that the Indian judiciary needs a structural reform?
Yes, it certainly needs a structural reform in many different ways. Firstly, we need to implement the Gram Nyayalayas, which is an act which was passed in 2010, by which uh, simplified courts were to be set up at the block level across the country. Today, we have courts only at the tehsil level. Thereafter, they were to go to the next lower level, which is the block level. And these courts were supposed to be simplified courts, which do not have to necessarily follow the CRPC and the CPC, so that even ordinary people could come to these courts to access justice without the help of lawyers. Now, unfortunately, that has not been done, with the result that poor people who cannot afford lawyers are left completely high and dry. They cannot access the courts. The second structural reform that is required is to increase the number of judges across the board so that cases are quickly heard and decided. The third is to improve the system of selecting judges. That is, you have to have a full-time judicial appointments commission, both for the lower judiciary and for the higher judiciary, which should be full-time bodies, independent of the government, totally independent of the government, and who should go about the job of selecting judges in a rational and transparent manner. That is, they lay down a criteria, they make that criteria public, they lay down how they will evaluate people across this criteria, And they then also publish the short list of people who have been selected so that general public knows who are the people who are being considered, and therefore send their comments or their information about these people. The fourth thing is that there needs to be a proper judicial complaints authority for entertaining and dealing with complaints against judges, against the misconduct of judges. Today we have impeachment, which is an impractical process. We need a very robust, a high-level independent body, independent of the government as well as of the judiciary, for entertaining complaints against judges, doing an inquiry into those complaints, and thereafter uh, deciding whatever needs to be done, whether the judge should be removed or whether he should be transferred or whatever. We don't have any such system today. The fifth thing is to make the judiciary more independent. You need to take away the lure of post-retirement jobs. You need to also ensure that investigations against judges of the higher judiciary are done by an independent authority and not by the government or government-controlled agencies like CBI or Enforcement Directorate, etc., which is also a method that the government is using uh, to kind of control or influence judges. So these are several structural reforms that need to be made.
Okay, sir. So in August of 2020, you were asked to pay a fine of 1 rupee after being found guilty of contempt of court. So, sir, what exactly is contempt of court, and do you feel your tweets violated the rules set by the court?
So contempt is of three kinds. One is civil contempt, that is disobedience of orders of the court. That is perfectly all right. And then you have criminal contempt is of also two kinds. One is interference with the administration of justice. So that is also perfectly all right. For example, if you do not allow court proceedings to take place, or you threaten a judge, or you threaten a lawyer or a litigant or even a witness, that if you depose in this way, I'll break your leg. That is interference with the administration of justice. That should be criminal contempt. There is no problem with that. This is the second part of criminal contempt, which is called lowering the authority of scandalizing the court or lowering the authority of the court. This is the problematic part. Because in this, any comment that you make against a court or a judge can be treated to be scandalizing the court or lowering the authority. Now, in a democracy, every citizen has the right to comment on every authority, including the judiciary. So today I am saying that the independence of the judiciary has collapsed. That's a comment that every citizen is entitled to make, seeing what is happening in the judiciary, so that appropriate reforms can take place. But if that is treated to be scandalizing the court or lowering the authority of the court, which some people can, then they can initiate contempt proceedings. So then that is a totally undemocratic, draconian, as well as where the judiciary sits as judges in their own cause. Then they are using the power of contempt to protect themselves from criticism or protect themselves from accountability. So this part has been abolished in all or almost all democracies in the world. It survives only in India. It's a colonial relic. When judges used to be considered to be representatives of the king, then any criticism of the king was supposed to be contempt, and that's how the contempt law was born. But in a democracy, this has no place. You see, criticism of judges or the judiciary is should be welcomed, should be normal. Only when you are interfering with the administration of justice, that should be contempt. But criticism cannot be treated to be however trenchant the criticism may be, cannot be treated to be interference with the administration of justice. So in India, this needs to be abolished as well. We have filed a petition to this effect. Arun Shori and Ram, the former editor of Outlook, Mr. Prashant Bhushan, and I have together filed a petition in the Karnataka High Court challenging, scandalizing the court. And the court has issued notice on that.
Oh, okay, sir. So our last question for you is, in your debate at Oxford on the motion regarding the Modi government, you made quite a few strong arguments on the role of this government thus far. Do you see any retaliation politically or from the people strong enough to be an opposing voice to the establishment?
Yeah, so despite the attempts of this government to choke off freedom of speech, to label anybody who questions the government or criticizes the government as being anti-national, and slapping sedition cases or cases sometimes even under UAPA against them. Fortunately, the number of people who are still outspoken and outspokenly criticizing the government has not gone down. It has in fact gone up. There are fortunately still a large number of independent media people who are in the on the internet media or on the social media who are doing a lot of good work, questioning this government's actions in destroying democracy in different ways. They have been attacking freedom of speech. They have been destroying various regulatory institutions such as the Judiciary, Election Commission, Controller and Auditor General, Human Rights Commissions, Lokpal, Reserve Bank. Every institution is being destroyed by this government. And therefore, democracy is very, very seriously threatened. If you read yesterday's op-ed or editorial article in the Indian Express, Barricaded Democracy by Suhash Palshikar, that tells you a great deal of what is the state of India's democracy today. So I'm glad that there are still a lot of very independent, outspoken voices still around in this country, despite the attempts of this government to somehow suppress them or crush them.
Okay, so with that, we come to the end of this interview. It was an incredible pleasure talking to you on such matters. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. And thank you so much, sir.